Happy Monday, everyone. It's John Lorden here with another episode of Brain Scratch Case Cracked. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for spending some time with me here today. This is a real interesting case, might be the longest one that we've done on the show so far. I've been really happy that with these production schedule changes that I've been able to give more time and attention to these Case Cracked episodes, and I think you're going to see this one certainly fits into that. Yes, there is a case, one particular crime that is cracked in this story, but as we go through this, you guys are going to see it seems like there are several other crimes that maybe haven't found their justice yet. This is a real interesting one, a lot of turns. I like to call it The Many Lives of Mr. Kondo. Let's take a look. Donnie Rudd was born in Texas in 1942. He attended Texas A&M, got married to his first wife, Luann, and moved to Chicago to attend law school. Donnie and Luann would have 4 children living in Hoffman Estates, a suburb of Chicago. Their marriage would eventually break up when Donnie started having an affair with a woman named Diane. Diane was also married with 4 kids of her own. When the couple split, Luann wound up marrying Diane's ex-husband, and people expected Donnie to marry Diane, but it didn't quite happen that way. In 1973, Donnie was in his early 30s and worked as a patent attorney at Quaker Oats. Recently divorced and still dating Diane, Donnie also became interested in a 19-year-old that worked at the same company, Noreen Cometa. Things progressed so quickly that Donnie's twin brother, Ronnie, was asked to be the best man at Donnie and Noreen's wedding just 2 weeks before it happened. September 14th, 1973, in the suburbs northwest of Chicago. Police were called to a car accident scene involving a 1972 Ford Pinto. A rookie officer named Christopher Bish was the first to arrive. He found Donnie Rudd and his new wife of only 29 days, Noreen. Donnie was in the car, cradling Noreen's head in his lap. She had severe injuries, blood was everywhere. The officer tried CPR, but was unable to resuscitate her. They rushed Noreen to the hospital, but upon arriving, it was clear she was already deceased. Donnie told police that a car was in their lane heading towards them, and they swerved to avoid a head-on collision. During the swerve, the passenger door opened, and Doreen fell out, her head striking a rock on the side of the road. The other driver was never found. No witnesses were ever found. Noreen was buried in her wedding dress. Diane got a wedding dress of her own. She and Donnie were married shortly after the car accident. He moved back in with her only a week after Noreen's death. Diane's oldest daughter, Lori, who was 16 at the time, finally worked up the courage to ask Donnie about Noreen's death. Donnie told her that it was an assassination attempt on him. He said he was working with a high-profile U.S. attorney as an informant on some big case, and that someone intentionally ran them off the road, then stopped and came to check the car to make sure Donnie was dead. The stepchildren remember several stories Donnie told them. Donnie was supposedly in Vietnam, the CIA, jumping out of helicopters, and knew many famous people. All facts easily dismissed by his first wife, but it appears Donnie was a bit of a storyteller, and maybe not just around the stepkids he was trying to impress. In terms of his professional career, Donnie transitioned from corporate patent law to a private practice specializing in condominium law. He got a vanity license plate on his car that said Mr. Condo, and starred in his own public access television show called the Condominium Television Network. The stepkids kept investigating Donnie's stories, mainly by asking his first wife, Luann, about them. As the lies fell apart, so did Donnie's relationship with his stepchildren. They started going tit for tat with each other. Lori describes it as Team Kids against Team Donnie. If they would leave a window open, he would glue it shut. If they left a burner on the stove turned on, he'd hide the knobs. The kids retaliated by hiding his things and even cleaning the toilet with his toothbrush. 3 of the stepchildren went off to college, leaving youngest daughter, Glory, home with Donnie and Diane. One night, Glory was home alone and heard footsteps downstairs. The footsteps continued up the stairs, and Glory was confronted by a woman in a fur coat. The woman told Glory that she was Donnie's fiancée. Team Kids finally had its proof that Donnie was a bad husband, and maybe they could get their mother to finally leave him. The woman was told by Donnie that he was remodeling his house, so she decided to come and check on it while he was out of town. Glory told her mother about Donnie's fiancée, but the master storyteller would once again swing into action. He told his wife that this woman was actually a client that was upset with Donnie, and she lied about being his fiancée just to get him in trouble. He told Diane he got a restraining order against his crazy client. But Team Kids would continue investigating Donnie, and on several occasions even followed him to the home of his new fiancée. Diane eventually agreed to leave him. Glory moved into a new home with her mother. However, Donnie remained persistent, and 6 weeks later, Diane moved back in with him. Sometime later, Diane would find out about another fiancé and even tried to end her own life by overdosing on sleeping pills. She was taken to the hospital, recovered, and went back home to Donnie. In the 1990s, things would take another turn. April 4th, 1991, a 59-year-old interior designer named Loretta Bodke was found murdered in her kitchen, shot 4 times in the face. Her husband made the gruesome discovery when he came home from work. Investigators thought the murderer was someone she knew because there was no forced entry into the home. 2 neighbors stated they saw a man with a briefcase enter Loretta's home after 3 p.m., and a vehicle with a specific vanity license plate, Mr. Kondo, was seen leaving. A few hours after she was discovered, police interviewed an attorney Loretta had hired and the owner of the Mr. Kondo license plate, Donnie Rudd. Donnie said he had visited Loretta at her home on April 3rd and 4th to discuss their case. Police asked to see any guns that Donnie owned, which he provided. None were a match to the bullets used to kill Loretta. Investigators found out that Donnie may have been lying to Loretta about the status of her case, specifically saying that he had won a settlement. As they looked into his past, they found several other clients that Donnie had lied to about winning cases. Investigators found a tore-up check in Loretta's trash from Donnie's personal account, and he was now their prime suspect. A grand jury was looking into Loretta's murder, and Donnie had someone that just obtained their law degree helping him with his defense, his wife, Diane, who took the stand and raised enough questions of reasonable doubt that there was no indictment. It seems like Diane helped Donnie get away with murder. The investigation would stay open, and police were still convinced they had their man. Donnie and Diane moved back to his home state of Texas. Donnie gave up his license to practice law and had to declare bankruptcy, but he was still a free man. Diane got a job as a corporate attorney, and Donnie got a job as a government fraud investigator. In 1995, however, Diane was fighting cancer, and she wasn't so sure that Donnie was in her corner. She was told to avoid hormones, but her family and even her doctor were told by her that she thought Donnie might be putting hormones in her food. As her struggle continued, she was finding out about new girlfriends of Donnie's. Quote, "Good old Donnie couldn't even let me get cremated in peace. This one's in Houston," she states on a video in a strangely matter-of-fact way. Eventually, her health declined to the point where Donnie wasn't able to take care of her. Diane moved in with some of her children back in Illinois. They kept the location secret from Donnie, but somehow he found out. He called and said he was coming to visit her, and Diane had lost over 100 pounds from being sick, but she put on a wig, makeup, and actually seemed very excited to see him. When one of the children came back into the room, Donnie was trying to get Diane to sign some papers, including car titles and a quitclaim deed to their home. When the signing session was stopped by one of Diane's children, Donnie wound up leaving about 20 minutes later. Cancer eventually won, and Diane passed away in 1996 at the age of 59. Would her children finally be rid of Donnie? 5 months after Diane's death, Donnie is married again to a woman named Mary. He trotted out some of his old stories for his new wife. He was a retired attorney who owned an oil company. He was in the CIA, a war hero injured in battle, and even had a Medal of Honor on display in their home. This lie would come back up when Donnie was in the hospital and doctors wanted to give him an MRI. His new wife spoke up and said that they couldn't because he had shrapnel in his body from the war. Donnie's older brother told Mary Donnie was never in the service. 9 months into the new marriage, Mary had filed a protective order against Donnie, and in 1999 the marriage was annulled at Mary's request. A few months later, Donnie, now 57, married for the 5th time. His new wife, Emma, was found on Match.com. His twin brother would not be the best man for this wedding. Donnie would have his dog take those honors. The brothers had grown apart, but Donnie and Emma decided to move Donnie's aging father in with them, seemingly to take care of him in his later years. 2 weeks later, Donnie called his twin, Ronnie, to let him know that their father had passed away, and Donnie had already buried him. Of course, their father also signed everything he owned over to Donnie. Other family members are extremely suspicious, and Ronnie hasn't spoken to Donnie since. Donnie's stories finally began to evolve. He was still claiming to be a war hero with his new wife, but now instead of a retired attorney, he was a doctor. He once again re-engineered the truth to reinvent himself, even earning a job as a chief scientist for a biotech startup called Regenitech, a company which quickly went bankrupt. Was anyone going to catch up to his stories and find out the truth about all these mysterious deaths surrounding Donnie, or even just one of them? In 2012, investigators were still working on the Loretta Bodke case and found out about some life insurance Donnie had on that wife that died in the car accident so many years before. Noreen Komenda's death landed Donnie with over $120,000. Investigators started wondering if it was really the accident that killed her, or was this a murder with a high-priced motive? They looked into the records and came out with many questions. There was practically no damage to the Pinto. There was no good explanation why the door would have flown open in a swerve. And if Noreen fell out of the car and hit the rock, why was she in the car with Donnie when police showed up? Why didn't her clothes have any grass or dirt stains? Why were there no other cuts or bruises to support the story of her being thrown from a car? The responding officer found no blood outside the vehicle at all. Investigators also found that the ER doctor that she was taken to listed cause of death as a fractured spine due to trauma, but no official autopsy had been performed. They couldn't even find an X-ray to support his conclusion. The question of how Noreen died didn't have a definitive answer. One Arlington Heights investigator named Richard Sperando knew they needed that answer. He contacted the officer that was at the crash scene, Christopher Bish, and they received court permission to exhume Noreen's body. In February of 2013, Noreen was taken from her final resting place, and finally an autopsy was performed. The cause of death was now finally official. Blunt force trauma, specifically several blows to both sides of her head. There was no spine fracture. Noreen's manner of death was now officially changed. It was a homicide. Investigators questioned Donnie about Noreen's death for a few hours and let him go. It seemed like Donnie was going to get away with it again. A few years later, now at the age of 73, Donnie was arrested and charged with murder. He asked which one, and was told it was for the murder of Noreen Komenda. He was extradited back to Illinois, and his bail was set at $4 million. He sat in prison for 9 months until another woman bailed him out, putting up about $400,000. Donnie's lawyers did their best to keep delaying the legal proceedings. However, in late June of 2018, he'd finally face a jury. The trial took only a week, and the jury spent just 3 hours in deliberation and came back with their verdict. Donnie was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Noreen Komenda. One of Noreen's sisters, Donna Hagerton, said, "It's been a 45-year nightmare. I'm just glad it's over." Donnie Rudd is now awaiting his sentencing, which is currently scheduled for September. It will be a minimum of 14 years. Donnie was given the choice of being sentenced according to 1973 law or current law, and he opted for the one that would give him less time in prison. Even if he was able to be paroled at the halfway point of that term, his lawyer says anything over 5 years is likely a death sentence, since now 76-year-old Donnie is supposedly being treated for cancer. The man that might also be responsible for the death of Loretta Bodke, his own father, and possibly trying to speed up his wife's losing battle with cancer, will finally face some form of justice. Loretta's daughter, Stephanie Tabak, is hopeful that the publicity now surrounding Donnie might bring some new evidence to her mother's still unsolved case. Another form of justice is that a man that was so focused on his public image, he lied about his past, lied about winning court cases, lied about being a doctor, and so much more, now has a new story being told. Two of Diane's daughters, Lori and Cindy, wrote a book all about Donnie called Living with the Devil. Case cracked. Wow, so many twists in that one, and it's a shame because I don't know if Stephanie, Loretta's daughter, will ever quite get the level of justice that she's looking for. She did attend the court trial for Noreen, but I don't know that her mother's case will ever officially have a conclusion. It's just one of those things. I've looked into a bit more detail than I've covered here, and they have so many pieces of that case that I don't know why they wouldn't have gone and at least tried to get a conviction on it. I guess, once it gets bounced out of a grand jury, that's probably a pretty tough position to then pick up a case and say, well, we're going to use the same information, but we're going to try it anyway. Honestly, I don't even know if they legally can do that. So I don't know. My heart just really goes out to Stephanie. Apparently, she's been doing some very interesting things to keep the police investigating her mother's murder. Every year, she'll go to the police station and she'll bring, cake or donuts and just kind of almost butter them up, just, hey, please don't forget about my mom. Please don't forget about her case. Very interesting approach, because I've heard a lot of people get angry with law enforcement, and of course that starts creating a divide. But here, even though she's frustrated with the case not moving as quickly as she'd like, or maybe even in the direction she'd like, she's still trying to, I guess, use honey to attract flies instead of vinegar. Is that how the saying goes? Another interesting aspect of this case, especially coming off Brain Scratch for the last couple of weeks where we've been talking about the Lauren Agee case, is the thing about the accident being assumed right off the bat. And this is another case where we kind of have that. There's this car accident. It's not even really an accident. The vehicle doesn't hit anything in particular. But we have this whole setup of what is made to look like a car accident, and you've got a rookie cop that's going to look at it, and it just doesn't occur to him. I mean, there's all these questions that we went through. It just doesn't occur to him that something is really odd about this scene, that this doesn't look like an actual accident scene, and he probably just didn't have the experience to realize it at the time. So it's one of those things, once again, where the assumption of an accident can really harm things. It took over 4 decades for justice to actually come out in this case. I'm thankful that they were able to get the body exhumed. I'm thankful that they had several experts talk about their new conclusions with the autopsy. And all of them were saying the same thing. This is blunt force trauma. This isn't and it's not the same type of trauma that you'd see with a car accident specifically. So, yeah, just makes me think of the Lauren Agee case, and I wish these investigations would have a process that would account for this possibility. That, yeah, looks like an accident, but let's check off these 5 or 10 things to make sure there's not something else going on here. And in another interesting twist, there's a question of, will another lie screw Donnie up? Basically, his attorney has been going to the press and talking about the fact that Donnie is now battling cancer. Well, now the state is asking for proof of that. And I'm pretty sure it's going to come up at his sentencing, which it could come up in one of two ways. First of all, if it is true, obviously his attorney is going to throw out, hey, by the way, my client's dying. So can that get them to consider lessening the sentence in some way? Possibly. But if the state proves that this is another one of Donnie's stories and maybe is not true, could that give the court a reason to actually stiffen his penalty? Hey, look, we've got this guy. We think he's been lying his whole life, and here we are going to a sentencing, and looks like we found another one. So I'll be kind of curious to see how all that shakes out. All right, everyone, time to move on to the comment section of the show, which, by the way, I'm really, really enjoying. Thank you guys so much for engaging with this, and it's fun to see this chain is happening of people commenting on the comment section. So it's letting conversations that need to continue, and I really appreciate that. Of course, these comments are from last week's episode, which was the Alicia Stansell case, and we're going to start with Natalie Palmer. Loved this. It's so sad her mother couldn't turn her life around and died so tragically. Yeah, Natalie, I agree on both fronts. First of all, I really appreciate doing these episodes because I do like hearing good outcomes in some of these stories. It gets really, really tough sometimes providing content for all of you guys and just having, a sad update, another sad update. And even in this case where, yeah, there is some tragedy that's in this story, there are some really bright lights. The nurse in particular, she's the hero of this story for me. And I almost think it's a shame that we don't know who she is. So I can't, or he, honestly, I'm not even sure if it's a man or a woman, but so I can't thank them and just say, hey, pretty amazing that you were willing to go the extra mile and put this together for this young woman. I do really think that that's cool. Miley on Disney says, Tony sold her for drugs. Now, I don't know if that's exactly a fair conclusion, but I did want to bring it up because something does seem weird to me about the fact that she left her child behind with someone that obviously she didn't even know this woman's last name. This woman was just called Dee. Something about that whole story really bothers me. So, Miley, I wanted to recognize that, yes, I do think there's more to that story that we don't understand. Is it that she sold her daughter for drugs? I don't know, because ultimately her daughter winds up in child protective services. I guess that could have happened if there was some, if she sold her child to someone else that got busted in some way, and then the child was found out to not be theirs and then was taken from them. But that's not quite the story that we've heard from this. The official story that has been repeated many times by several media sources is that she was handed from family to family until she was eventually left with the police. So I don't know if, why would you buy a child, let's say, and then hand it off to another family and then the child winds up with police? It's possible, I guess, if you got nervous about being found out and, going to jail for that or something along those lines. But I do agree, Miley, there's something very weird about that aspect of the story. And that's one of the toughest things about covering this story in particular is there's this level of identity protection that's going on with Alicia. And because of that, we're not really getting comments from her. We're not getting investigators that have reached out to her and, quotes from her. And there's the other aspect where we don't even have the nurse speaking up. We don't have anything in terms of the details. So it's a little bit tough, but I also respect the privacy. And I still think that there is a good story and good lessons for us to learn from this. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to share it with all you guys. Jojo Stout makes you wonder how we can send off and pay 23andMe to test our DNA and even our animals and have that info back in a couple months. But it took 3 years for this girl. Politics and money angers me. Jojo, I totally hear you. And I know several people have commented about backups in terms of DNA processing and rape kit processing. We had a horrible issue in California several years ago where they were literally hundreds of rape kits that were collected and just never processed. And finally, they were trying to address that. I agree with you. I don't know why this took 3 years. If there's a failure in this story, I think some people might say, well, the real failure is this mother that gives up her child and, turns to this life of drug abuse and prostitution. I can't deny that. But outside of that, if there's another failure in this story, it is definitely that it took 3 years for those results to come back. I wouldn't expect it to take that long myself, especially for an active missing persons case, or even I'm sure this was a cold case at that point, but still, it's a lead on an open investigation. Why would it take that long? I don't know. And I'm just as frustrated about that. But like I said, I hope that sharing it here, I hope that more people being aware of this instance because of all the media around this case is going to get some of these law enforcement agencies to say, hey, you know what? We don't want articles written about us like that have that little tidbit about, 3 years for a DNA result. So if there is something they could do to speed that process up, I'm hoping that this type of discussion helps with that. And Rockstar of Redondo in California, your baby's DNA is already collected when he or she is born. That comment really grabbed me, and something we don't typically do on Case Cracked is actually do a screen share of an article, but I wanted to look into that more, and I did find an article at sacramento.cbslocal.com. Questions are being raised after the state spent decades collecting the DNA of infants without parents realizing it. California has been collecting newborn blood samples since 1983. I had no idea about any of that. And apparently California isn't the only state doing this. Looks like they got a little backwards wording here. Pricking the newborn's toes to test their blood for certain disorders. The remaining blood becomes property of the state and could be shared with outside researchers. The state tells new parents about it, but it's hidden on page 13 of a 14-page pamphlet, and California can hold on to those samples indefinitely. Fred Laurie, who used to run California's genetic disease screening program, says the blood spots are de-identified. So basically, yes, the blood is being used for research purposes, but there's no information to tie that back to the identity of who that blood came from. Then we get someone named Jamie Court. There is no such thing as de-identified DNA, said Jamie Court, head of Consumer Watchdog. Court points to the arrest of Joseph D'Angelo, the suspected East Area rapist, reportedly identified when using his DNA was matched with a profile on a public ancestry site. I think Jamie is overstating things here a little bit, or she's not understanding the direction of how that information was used. Having random DNA samples of babies is not helpful in any way. If it is truly that these blood spots are de-identified, and quite honestly, I question that. I don't know if that's accurate or not. This particular point that she's bringing up, talking about the East Area rapist, doesn't really make sense, because let's say they did have a perfect match, right? And using a database of babies' DNA that was de-identified. All that would happen is they'd be able to look at it and say, oh yeah, we can tell that there was a baby maybe born in this year, and this baby matches this criminal. If there's no way to identify who that baby is, that is not useful, and that's not the mechanism that we're talking about, and that's not what really happened in the East Area rapist case. What happened in the East Area rapist case is they had an unknown sample and then matched that to known DNA. So essentially, you've got the information flipped backwards. Is there still the possibility of identification thanks to familial matches and all that? Yes, but you would then be using the same mechanism that they already used in the East Area rapist case. You'd have to go to GED Match or some public area that is storing DNA information and have a genealogist then do the family comparisons. It's weird because I understand her concern. I just think it's a bad example that she's made here. California is not saying exactly what happens with these blood samples after reaching the state's biolab, but parents can request the state destroy their child's blood samples. The burden's on you, a sleepless new mom, to remember to call them and then follow up, said another mom. California is one of 4 states storing blood spots indefinitely in a state-run biobank. Interestingly, this article doesn't go into who the other states are, but if you're interested, you should probably look it up. Or if you know, drop it in the comments below for the rest of us. I I'd be very, very surprised if there isn't some mechanism of tying those blood spots back to their identities. For example, if there is dates on when that stuff is coming into the blood bank, you might be able to figure out at least an approximate date range of the age or the birth date of the person, and then potentially using that with birth records. Maybe you could line something up. If you know where the blood's coming from and on the day that it's coming from, what hospital and the date that it was actually sent out, you could certainly narrow things down. Just because I have a database over here that has names and I've got a separate list over here that has blood samples, doesn't mean that those two things stay in their silos forever. All it takes is a good analyst that is able to link those things back up. But even outside of all that, I'm really wondering if there isn't already some method of identifying those blood samples where they are staying with the state. I'd be very, very surprised. I don't know. What do you guys think? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me on today's Case Cracked. I hope each and every one of you has a wonderful week. Come on back on Wednesday for a new episode of Searchlight. I'll see you here on the Lord and Arts channel.